A continuación, te presentaré el caso de la abogada de la salud Nancy Danison, quien estudió la carrera de psicología con un posgrado en biología y quien después hiciera un doctorado en jurisprudencia, siendo reconocida como una de las mejores abogadas en Ohio, según la revista Columbus CEO Magazine. Nancy Danison vivió una fascinante experiencia de vida después de la muerte en marzo de 1994. Nancy abandona el traje. Al darse cuenta de ello, siente unas presencias pero no las puede ver. Localiza una luz e intuye que debe ir hacia ella, así que con solo pensar en la acción que debe realizar, esta se ejecuta inmediatamente y se ve frente a esa luz. Comienza a vivir la experiencia y a interpretarla. Lo que sucedería después cambiaría por completo su sistema de creencias.
Nancy Danison, and today's topic is what happens when we die. I died March 14th, 1994. I was in university hospitals for what's called an excisional breast biopsy, which meant that they didn't do like a needle puncture or anything. They pretty much assumed it was going to be cancer, and so they were just going to cut the whole thing out. They cut a wedge out about like this size. Because I didn't have a lump, the only way that the surgeon would know where to cut was through a procedure, a radiological procedure called a needle localization procedure. So I was in the radiology department for the radiologist to stick a needle into my breast with a wire inside and then pull the needle out and leave the wire for the surgeon to cut around. And then she also, the radiologist drew a little map, here are the 3 lesions, please cut here. All of that positioning of the needle and the wire had to be done with the mammogram. So you ladies know what that's like to be. I had 8 mammograms as part of this procedure. Because the first time the radiologist didn't get the needle in far enough. She had to do the whole thing over again. The only medication that I was on was the local anesthetic for the skin. After the 8th set of mammograms, the radiologist left with the radiology technician. I assumed to get the films developed, and we'd been at it about an hour and a half, so I thought they were probably going to take a break. So they were gone. Shortly after they left, so did I. I was sitting there in a chair, pretty much like this one, with my arms on the wrists, with this wire hanging out of my breast and my little hospital Johnny on. And all of a sudden, I felt funny. And I thought, oh, I'm going to pass out. And I tried to get up to go out the door to yell for somebody to come, but it went too fast. I couldn't get up. First thing that happened was I lost vision in the periphery of my eyesight. The color went out, and then the color gradually went out completely, and I was only seeing in black and white. Then the black and white vision started going out and tunneling down to the point where I only had vision like right out in front of me. And then it went out, and I couldn't see anything. And then I had this sinking sensation. It felt like sinking down from my head. This upsets my body to hear about it. And I was pulling out of my arms, pulling out of my shoulders, and pulling out of my neck, just sinking. And I wasn't frightened because I thought I was just going to pass out. Next thing I know, I went whoosh, and I'm standing right there in front of my body. And I knew the body was behind me, and I went, cool! I'm in front of my body. And I'm still alive. And I didn't pass out. And I didn't know what it was, what had happened to me. I realized I was in total darkness. But it wasn't a frightening darkness. It felt like, when you enter into a dark room and you can feel that there's somebody in there, maybe a cat or a dog or maybe a sleeping child, you can feel their presence. That's what this was like. I could feel the presence of one or more others around me. But I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything. I didn't feel anything. My mind said, oh, I know what this is. I'm supposed to go in the light. And in the distance, there was this little tiny dot of light. And as soon as I said, I'm supposed to go into the light, whoosh, I was in the light. It was like it came to me. It just all of a sudden engulfed me. And I'm in the light, and I'm looking around, and there's nothing there. There's nothing to see. I can't hear anything. I don't feel anything. So I figure, I should probably figure out what happened to me. So I started making a diagnosis. I went through, I'm a health lawyer, and most of my clients are physicians, some hospitals. And I started going through what a physician does in their, review of systems. I'm going, no heartbeat, no breathing. I can't feel heat or cold, but there may not be any heat or cold here. I can't see anything, but I know I can see. I can't hear anything. I can't smell anything. I can see through the back of my head. And then all these thoughts started coming. Like all kinds of information about things that I might have studied at one point in time in my life. A bunch of stuff about psychology. I remember I got knowings about mental health and how American, or maybe not American, but how human physicians completely misunderstand mental illness. That it's really the manifestation through the physical body of all these wonderful spiritual powers that we have, and not an illness. And I got information about physics and time, and that time is not a constant, and it doesn't actually exist, and there's no time once you get outside the body, and it's just time is just a fiction of human measurement, like pounds and inches. And a bunch of other things that I don't remember. But I was aware that I was getting all this information. At the same time, I'm still doing my review of systems, and I realize I'm still me. I'm not in my body anymore, but I'm still me. I still think the same way, I feel the same way, and I have all the emotions except fear. And I realize there's no fear. I have no idea where I am, but I'm not afraid. I can feel this love and acceptance kind of going through me like a breeze, only without any movement. And it felt like I was expanding, or like kind of like I was molecules that were getting farther and farther apart, and that the love was filling in between. And I felt like my love was boomeranging back out into the light. And I realized I wasn't going to be on Earth anymore. I never once thought, oh, I'm dead, because I thought I was passed out, even though I was completely conscious. But I realized I wasn't going to be on Earth anymore. And I missed some things about Earth. I missed being able to touch. And I couldn't feel anything. No skin, no touch. I missed wind. I missed feeling sun on my skin, laying out in the sun. I was my sun lizard. I missed chocolate. And I missed food in general. And I thought, wow, if I had known I was going to miss it so much, I would have eaten like a pig before I did, but, while I was still in the body. I started seeing what it had really been like in life. I got all this information about what humans are like and what I'm like now as a spiritual being, and the difference between the two. And I saw how so much of my personality as Nancy had been colored by fear. I mean, things that I thought were just normal, like working hard and getting ahead and wanting to be a success and studying hard in school and getting A's and, all the things that we kind of are taught in America particularly are what we should be striving for I saw all those things as just the expression of fear. And I was embarrassed by how I spent my life, how money-grubbing I had been, and believe me, I was money-grubbing out of fear. I was always afraid there wasn't going to be enough. I got all this information about humans and what their innate characteristics are like, and that they have personalities, that they have their own emotions that are different from the emotions that we have as spiritual beings, the primary difference being fear, and all the other emotions that come off of that, revenge, hatred, lust, and just all kinds of things.
En esta primera parte, Nancy Danison también habla del sistema operante en la dimensión material del planeta Tierra, cuyo fundamento de control es el miedo, y es a través de este sentimiento o energía que se ejerce dominio sobre los seres que la habitan, y es en ese otro plano espiritual o fuera del traje humano que se goza de la libertad emocional de no ser un prisionero más de las ilusiones o imágenes mentales engañosas del éxito material. En esta segunda parte de la experiencia de vida después de la vida, ocurrida a Nancy Danison, nos explica, según su forma de entender, la separación multidimensional que experimentó, así como también su comprobación de cómo, con el solo hecho de pensar en algo, esto se manifiesta de forma instantánea. También experimenta nuestra capacidad para crear la realidad material en que vivimos.
I realized that I had multiple simultaneous levels of awareness, that I could see myself kind of like here and step back and look at myself as an objective observer and watch myself getting all this information in my head, having all these thoughts and feelings, and then I could back up from that and see myself watching myself, thinking to myself, and I would step out from that and see myself. This is when I first realized I could see on the back of my head, because I was seeing myself from the perspective of me as an individual being in this one little space. And then I would switch perspectives and be out here at a greater perspective, while at the same time still feeling like I was at this perspective. And I went out and out and out, and each time I got farther and farther out in perspective, the more ridiculous the perspective below it seemed to me. Ridiculous, but in kind of a cute way, like when you watch a baby and you know that they're falling down or they're goofing around or whatever, you think it's really cute even though you know that's not really the way you walk, or you realize that they're inept, but you love them for the ineptness. That's what I was doing when I was having these multiple simultaneous layers of awareness. I was getting a broader and broader and broader perspective on myself and on my life and on everything, thinking all the while that I had really not done a great job while I was in Nancy's body. One of these times when I was out at one of these multiple levels of awareness, I realized if I looked down, I could see this body sitting in the chair, just like this, staring straight out into space. Well, not into space, I was staring at the back of the room where there are a bunch of light boxes for people to slap x-rays up and turn them on so you could see through the x-ray. And I looked at that body and I went, huh. I don't know what all that vanity was about. Sure doesn't look like much to me now. And then I realized I really didn't care about that body at all. It was like floor, chair, body. Okay. They all meant the same to me. And then I was embarrassed that I had so little regard for that human that had carried me around for 43 years. And then I'm thinking, where I am in relation to that body, I know I'm in the light, but it kind of looked, to the body it would look like I'm on the ceiling. But I knew I was in a completely different, you couldn't call it a place. I don't know if you call it a realm, a dimension, I don't think that there is really a human word for it. And I realized I had multiple simultaneous levels of awareness while I was watching this body. At the same time that I was having these observations about it, I was also feeling, embarrassed that I felt that way about the body, and I was seeing this, from the ceiling thing, and all that was going on, all in one instance, all at the same time. And then I thought to myself, well, if the body's down there, and I'm here in the light, nah, I couldn't. I always went through a tunnel into the light, and I didn't go through any tunnel. And instantly, I'm in a tunnel. And I'm in this earthen, gosh, like out in the country or something. It's an earthen train trellis kind of tunnel, the tracks go over the top, and it's all earth here, and then it's concrete, and then it's, I think, dirt where I was under the tunnel. And I could smell, wet earth and dank stuff, and I thought, I know I'm not in a tunnel, I'm in the light. And I realized the instant I thought, you're supposed to go through a tunnel, I was in a tunnel. And I kind of realized I had created that tunnel just by thinking it. So I'm saying to myself, this is the same person who did the review of systems earlier. I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to think of some other expression. Like, I've heard the afterlife is like this beautiful meadow. I'm in this beautiful meadow. And I mean, it's a real meadow. Have you ever seen the movie Robin Williams, What Dreams May Come? It was like that, except it wasn't paint. It was a real beautiful sky, birds singing, there were mountains in the distance, there was a purple haze over them, the sun was shining. It was gorgeous. But I knew I was in the light. I wasn't in that meadow. So I thought, I created this meadow just by thinking it's supposed to be a meadow. One more experiment. I'm going to assume that I've just hallucinated all this, and I'm back in my body, and I'm on my way over to the James. I was in the University Hospital's radiology department, and they had to walk me over to the James for surgery. So I figure I'm on my way over to the James, and everything's fine, and none of this happened. I'm in the hallway, walking up from the radiology department over to the James. I'm walking with my Johnny on, with this wire sticking out, which I don't think they would really let you do. There was a nurse beside me. I could feel her presence. I could smell her perfume. I could smell that hospital smell, that you can't get away from if you're in a hospital. I could feel the floor under my feet. I could see this orange or purple stripe running down the wall, like this way to surgery. It was absolutely real. It was as real as any of this that's going on now. I had absolutely no doubt that that was Earth, that was physical reality. Except that I knew it wasn't. And I realized that's the difference between what we experience when we're in the body on Earth and what's real. The difference is you're not fooled by it. And I realized I wasn't fooled by these manifestations. And that word came into my mind, manifestations. And I got this huge download of information about what manifesting is, that we manifest physical reality all the time, every second of our existence, and that when we're in the light, we know we're doing it, so we're not fooled by it. When we're in the body, we don't know that we're doing it, and so it fools us, and we believe it is real. And I started getting more and more information about manifesting. And at this point I realized I died. That seemed to be kind of a triggering event, because I'd just been in the light by myself with nothing going on except all these mental things, in my head. Once I realized I had died, I saw 5 more lights in the distance. They were kind of like maybe layers, 5 stacked. And they weren't like round lights, they were like strips of light. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, this is a typical Danison moment. I heard you're supposed to go into the light, and I get 5 of them, and I've got to pick the right one. And while I'm trying to figure out which light to pick, a voice, not my own, comes into my head and says, it doesn't matter. Just pick one and follow it. And immediately after that, there were 5 beings They were shaped kind of like, you know, a blob of a human being. And they were like, right like you guys are right here, except that there were 5 of them. And I don't know whether they came out of the light or they were the lights. But they were there, and instantly I realized, my people, these are my people. This is who I really am. I'm one of these beings. In my mind, I was calling them beings of energy. I since changed it to beings of light because that's what near-death experiencers call them. And I guess lots of people see them when they die. These 5 beings made me feel completely at home. I mean, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was home. And I realized how much I had missed it, and how much I had missed them. I knew them. I mean, I knew their names and kind of this ancient language. The only one I can remember, and I'm not sure this is right, is something like Ankuf. I mean, they were all names with hard consonants in them and very hard to pronounce in English. And they were thinking things at me telepathically. And to put what they were thinking at me into words would be like, we had to run ahead of the rest of us to welcome you back. And the rest of us was in English.
El caso de Nancy Danison es de enorme importancia para la posterior explicación del tema extraterrestre que estaré presentando en una serie exclusiva al tema. Ella tiene un encuentro con 5 seres que reconoce de inmediato como a su familia, pero a la vez ella se encuentra en un traje humano viviendo una experiencia terrestre. Estos seres le ofrecen información interesante que deberá recordar a su retorno. Los seres que se encuentran con Nancy Danison le muestran una historia de la humanidad en la Tierra muy diferente a la que ella ha estudiado en escuelas convencionales del sistema, donde hacen una clara separación entre la era de los dinosaurios y la del hombre, pero lo mostrado a Nancy le sugiere una primera etapa del ser humano conviviendo con ellos. Nota: en Ica, Perú, se han encontrado cientos de piezas y piedras antiguas en las que se representa a seres humanos conviviendo con dinosaurios.
Then went into what near-death experiencers call life review. You know, these beings were really excited to see what happened in my life, and I kind of projected it on like a big bubble. Picture a soap bubble. And you know how soap bubble, you know, they're filming on the outside and things kind of swirl around, the colors move, and you look at it different ways, you see different things. It was like Nancy's 43 years of living were all on that bubble, scenes, like scenes from a movie. But it included not just like the video of what you would see in a movie, but it's every sensory impression that this body had ever taken in. Every sight, every sound, every smell, every touch. I can remember seeing skies, like all kinds of skies. Skies when I was a little kid, you know, stormy skies. I distinctly remember seeing the sky outside the window when I'm a pilot, private pilot, and I remember seeing the sky outside my windows when I was flying, and this rainbow that I had seen and tried to fly through. I remember distinctly seeing the sky outside my window in my office, my old law firm. I also remember like different bits and pieces of sensory information that were, you know, kind of floating around this bubble. I was inside the bubble. There was one being of light inside the bubble with me. The others were on the outside of the bubble, but they were entering into my life as though they were physically entering into this body and living it. So it's like one of them could enter into this moment in my life and be me experiencing this moment. And then they move on and sample something else. And sometimes they would like enter into my life and just watch it as an observer, and like an invisible observer. Other times they would be in my body as them, and other times they would be in my body as me. And I was watching them do this, and I was like, who knew? I mean, this is the most fantastic thing I'd ever seen. So I wasn't paying any attention to my life review. And, you know, I'm sure you've read stories about people, you know, when their life flashes in front of their eyes, and they see all these things, and they, you know, realize, oh, they should have done this, they should have done that. I was vaguely aware that while my life was being flashed on this soap bubble, that I could see everything that I had done and feel it, and feel how it impacted every single person who was either in proximity to me or in proximity to the person who experienced it. So, for example, it's like I would feel how Janet felt about this moment, and then how maybe her whole family felt when she goes back and says, well, this is what Nancy said. But, you know, I can feel the ripples or the repercussions from every single person that I'd ever touched. So I was barely aware of that. I wasn't paying much attention because I was so enthralled with these light beings, you know, in and out of my life, you know. Beyond that, I was getting huge downloads of everything I ever wanted to know. I call it universal knowledge. It was all the truths of the universe. Who am I? Who is God? What's the purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? Why was I on earth? Where's heaven? Where's hell? Where are the angels? You know, why isn't this anything like what I expected from my religion? Everything. All the questions that had tormented me before I died. All the things I'd been trying so hard to figure out from reading books and talking to people. All the answers were there. And I got this knowing that all you have to do to get those answers, to get that information from universal knowledge, you know, just a term that several people have attached to it, is focus your attention and intention. Your attention on whatever it is you want to know, and your intention to know it. And the knowings were not like something you read in a book. It was knowing on an experiential level. Knowing it as though I had lived it. Knowing it as though I was so intimately familiar with it. You know, it was second nature to me. All of it. And while it was coming, I was both going, wow, you know, that's a surprise. And I used to know that. I remember that. Yeah, it's all coming back to me. I remember all this stuff. One of the things that particularly stood out in my mind was the fact that, you know, I hadn't seen any angels. I hadn't seen my parents. Well, one of my parents had been dead for a number of years at this point. I had a dead sister. I had dead grandparents. Didn't see any of them. So, and I didn't expect it to. I didn't see any angels. I didn't see Jesus. I didn't see God. I didn't. It wasn't like, you know, what I had read about. And I was in Catholic school for 12 years, and then I went to Methodist college for 4 years, and then I studied Judaism because I was going to convert. And I had been reading, you know, Buddhism and Taoism, and, you know, I had a lot of exposure to religions, and I'd taken comparative religions in college, and it wasn't like anything that I had read. So I wanted to know, okay, universal knowledge, why isn't this like what I expected? And in response to that attention and intention, I saw kind of a documentary. This is the only thing that came to me in a human-like frame of reference. It's a documentary of the history of planet Earth and where religion fit in, how religion had developed and how it had evolved and where it was now. I saw the planet being formed. I saw the first humans in the first epoch superimposed over this like documentary, like on a movie screen. It's kind of like a graphic at the top that had a timeline on it, and it was like marked off, these many years is the first epoch, these many years is the second epoch, and then from here on is the third epoch. And the words epoch came into my head. I don't even know if I'm saying it right. That's the way it's pronounced in the afterlife. I could see that there was one species of human in the first epoch that evolved from lower life forms, developed and was killed off at the same time that the Earth re-terraformed, which killed off all the dinosaurs and pretty much all the old, you know, extinct animal species. A second species of humans evolved in the second epoch, and that's what we are. I saw that there's a third species of humans evolving for the third epoch. And all of this is in my next book called Backwards Beliefs, so I won't go into much detail here. But I was fascinated by, you know, watching humans evolve and watching their fear create the basis for the most primitive of religions, and then how that fear and superstition got kind of multiplied and created these really complicated and intricate and fascinating religions. And I watched the whole thing thinking, if I'd known all that, I certainly would have lived my life differently. And at the same time thinking, aren't they cute? Aren't they just the most adorable and sweet and wonderful and primitive and unsophisticated and just the most lovable little primitive creatures? At the end of, or actually as I was going through this documentary, I felt kind of cheated, misled, disappointed, duped. There's not really a good word for it, but it's in that neighborhood, by what I'd studied as a human. I felt like my education had let me down. All those years of religious training, all that reading, didn't even come anywhere close to the truth as I saw it in this documentary. And believe me when I say, what you see in the afterlife, you are absolutely convinced beyond a doubt is true. When I look back on human life, it was like reading a comic book in comparison. It was not real. And I was flabbergasted by how unreal human life is, how I could possibly have ever thought that I was a human being, and that was life. I could not get over what kind of mechanism it must have taken to convince me that human life was real, when I knew darn well it wasn't, now that I'm in the light and I've got all this access to all this information and I saw, the truths of the universe. So I'm feeling kind of, I would have done a better job at Nancy had I known all this.
La historia ha sido manipulada para sosegar las ansias sobre el cuestionamiento del origen de las especies y del ser humano en el planeta. Para ello han hecho válidas teorías ridículas sustentadas por la palabra de reconocidos investigadores y científicos de todos los tiempos. De este modo, todos los demás seres humanos enrolados en múltiples actividades diarias y sin un momento para la investigación propia, optan por creer ciegamente en estos líderes impuestos por el sistema. Y créeme, no todo es como lo cuentan. Nancy Danison explica cómo en esa dimensión ella era capaz de vivir las experiencias de estos seres como experiencias de vida propia y viceversa, efectuando un proceso multidimensional propio del espíritu. Lo que Nancy vivió en esa dimensión es algo muy personal, queriendo decir con esto que no todos tenemos la misma experiencia al abandonar el traje, ya que ello depende de muchos factores que conciernen a la conciencia individual.
The next thing that kind of comes into my mind was, my beings of light friends can enter into my life. And then I realized I could enter into theirs. And I stopped being a being. I stopped having any kind of discrete beingness about me. And I entered into a pure consciousness. I just existed in a state of pure consciousness. And I merged into my being of light friends one at a time. I lived their lives. I would enter into one of their lives and watch it as an observer, participate in it as myself, participated in it as them, inside their body, feeling their emotions, knowing it was their life and not mine, but still feeling at the same time that it was absolutely real and that I was really experiencing it. And I could enter into 2 or 3 or 4 or all 5 of them at the same time and feel what it was like to be one collective being with multiple personalities. I could sense my own individuality in the 6 while at the same time feeling that I was one being of 6. I could feel myself being one of them within the 6 while at the same time being myself or not being myself. And I spent a lot of time just doing that, back and forth inside of their existences and feeling like a being of 6 and feeling like a being of 1 and feeling like I was them, feeling like I was me. It was fascinating. And I realized you learn so much faster when you could just hop into somebody else's life and be them. So I did that for a while. Then all of a sudden, it just felt like it was time. And the 6 of us were all merged together, and we started moving forward. We were going back to the rest of us. The rest of us was coming. And we were going back into the rest of us. Going back into the rest of us, there's nothing like it. I mean, there are no human words. The closest I can come is like maybe going through layers of the sun's corona. You know, starting at maybe Earth, you know, we can feel the sun's heat and see its light and everything, and so that would be like one layer of it. And then although out in space you don't feel anything from the sun, let's assume that we skip the outer space part and we go right to the sun, and there are levels of its corona as you get closer and closer to the sun. It's something like that. Or maybe a light bulb, you know, where as you move closer to the light, you get more luminosity. It was an increasing experience. So as we started through these layers at Source, all of a sudden I didn't feel my other 5 being of light friends anymore. It was just me. And I realized I was merging into what we call God. At one level, I saw creation again through God's eyes. When I'd seen it in the documentary, I saw it as an observer watching from the outside. This time, I watched the universe being created from pure thought. And I saw how the universe was pure energy. It was pure Source's energy. And Source did not create individual things. Source created processes, created the energy that then became physical matter and combined and discombined and blew up and did all kinds of things to create things like planets and stars and galaxies and outer space and everything that we can perceive as a human. Source created those properties and also created the things that we call laws, the laws of physics. I guess the laws of physics are the only laws I can think of. But they're not laws, they're internal mechanisms. And I saw that everything has internal mechanism of being pure energy, then creating a thing or a being, and then living a life, and then dissolving that life, and then doing it all over again. And so life was kind of spiraling. And then at the end, it all boomeranged back to Source. And I understood that this entire universe is on the backswing. It's all moving back into Source. It will all merge back into Source and then no longer exist. And then Source will create a new universe. Anyway, I'm watching all this. I'm getting closer and closer to the core of Source. And as I was moving through the levels, the love was excruciating. I mean, if I had to feel it in a body, I don't think I could have survived it. I mean, it's so intense. It's you can't even imagine it in human form. I can't imagine it, even though I've experienced it. Well, I'm getting answers. Answering me more and more information about the nature of Source and how it came to be and why it created the universe and how we came to be and what we're made of and blah, blah, blah. And all those answers came to me as certainties, as knowings. All the information that's in my books and in some of these classes that I give. While all this is going on, I'm still kind of in the back of my mind thinking, oh man, I wish everybody could know this. And all of a sudden, I knew I was going to come back. And it was a moment of, I knew it was Nancy's time to die. And I knew I was I knew I was in the process of merging back into Source for good. But because I had this feeling like I could have done it better, and that maybe if I had known, and if other people knew what I'm experiencing now, it would change their lives. Because of that, I guess the source just let me go. And I started back to the body. Oh my gosh, coming back into the body was just, it's like being in a hurricane, and not the eye part, the swirling part. And all this stuff was swirling around me, and I knew I was on my way back to the body. And I wanted to remember as much as I could. So I was like memorizing it, cramming for that exam. I'm stuffing stuff into my head, and I'm trying to memorize. And while I'm memorizing all the stuff that I'd learned, my Being of Light friends were kind of on the periphery going, love is all that matters. Love is all that matters. And they kept chanting it. And I'm in my mind saying, shut up, I want to remember this stuff,
Para cada ser humano, la experiencia de abandono del traje humano es diferente. Esta depende del nivel de conciencia adquirido en la dimensión terrestre, del nivel de apego a la experiencia humana, de la cantidad de vidas recorridas bajo este sistema o similares, del lugar de origen o procedencia, de la misión u objetivos que generaron su ingreso al traje humano, entre muchas otras razones.
So, I get back in the body, and I'm way deep inside, and it felt like I could talk through a megaphone out to the mouth, and it felt like there were funnels from the ears into me where I could hear, and I could feel that I was trying to push back into this body, and I was going, no, 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 I don't want in the body, because it felt like putting on cold, wet, disgusting clay about as tight as a diver's wetsuit, and I didn't want to go in. But I was percolating back into it anyway. And I eventually got to the point where I realized that the radiologist and rad tech were at the back of the room with films up on the view box, looking at them, and the radiologist was drawing a little map for the surgeon of where to cut. And I said, I passed out. And to me it sounded like I'm yelling through a megaphone out to this little mouth that's going, I passed out. The radiologist turns around and looks at me and says, are you all right? I said, no. So the rad tech went to the door and yelled out in the hallway for a nurse. The nurse came in, put a blood pressure cuff on me, this arm, and started pumping it up. And the radiologist says, do you know who you are? I said, oh yeah, I know who I am. I knew way more about who I am than you could even imagine. She says, do you know where you are? I said, mammo room. And to me it was so hard to get mammo room out of this mouth, She says, do you know who I am? I said, you look familiar, but I can't place you. And that's when she knew I'd been unconscious. And I think I heard the nurse saying 60 over palp and rising, which would have been my blood pressure. So they let me sit there for a while, and my blood pressure did come back up. And I got to the point where I could talk, and use the body. It felt like, did you ever see the movie where somebody's inside a robot or something and they're trying to move these robotic arms and legs? That's what I felt like I was doing with this body. And I remember saying, oh, it was because I haven't eaten. They don't let you eat after midnight the night before. This was probably about 11 o'clock in the morning, and I'd never gone that long without eating. So I'd probably just passed out because I hadn't eaten. So they went ahead with surgery, which surprised me. They had somebody with me. They had a physician with me the whole time, from that moment till the surgery was over, and then they had a nurse with me back in my room in the hospital. But they didn't leave me alone for a second after that. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Sorry for getting emotional, but the body doesn't like to hear she died. If you've ever read, near-death experience stories, or ever heard about them? Or, everybody's heard something about, a near-death experience story. The one thing that my story and their stories have in common is that they are unique. Just like each one of our human lives is completely unique, so is each one of our afterlives. And while there is a specific process that we go through where we transform from what I call human mode, or the human level of perception, up to a spiritual level of perception, how we get there, there are steps that are set. We don't necessarily go through them in order. The content of those steps is completely individualized for us. So no two people will have an identical near-death experience or death experience, because it is specifically designed with you in mind to get you what you need when you need it, with the least amount of trauma and the most degree of comfort. What humans think of as death, Source thinks of as recycling. And that's what we do. Now, I participated in my afterlife experience from multiple levels, and I kind of tried to give you the flavor of that. At times I felt like I had the human perspective, where I was like really surprised by what was going on. And other times I was going, oh yeah, I remember that. That's the spiritual perspective. And I'd go back and forth, or have them at the same time. And then as I got higher and higher levels of spiritual perspective, like merging into Source and everything, I still had all those underlying levels of perception that kind of went along with it. I don't know if when you die for good you lose all that or not, but that's the way it was for me. Because that's the way it was for me, I had the unique opportunity to compare and contrast the various levels of perspective on death and the afterlife. And I'm sure you've heard that near-death experiencers sometimes come back with gifts. Their gift might have been they're cured from their cancer, they're psychic, they may be a healer. Most experiencers who actually go into the afterlife and have a deep enough experience do come back with a gift. My gift was memory. I crammed for the exam, and I remember far more than anybody else I've ever, read about or heard about. And I've been trying to impart that information since I started this mission a few years ago. But this all happened in 1994. It took me until December of 1995 to know it was a near-death experience. I thought something medical had happened to me, and I kept trying to get my doctors to give me a diagnosis, and they kept saying, oh, you hallucinated. But in December of 1995, I saw the movie Saved by the Light, the Daniel Brinkley story. I saw it on TV, and as soon as I watched it, I went, that's it, buddy, that's what happened to me. I knew I didn't hallucinate it. And that kind of opened a whole world for me. But the world that opened was memories, remembering the experience. And the more I remembered it, the more it came up. And I was very, very ill in 2001, and a lot of the memories came back then. I started writing them down, and that's what's in my books. It's the memories from, and I go back into the light and I relive the experience, and then I come out of it and start typing it up. So that's how my gift of memory works. In order to understand what happens after we die, you have to get out of your human perspective. Humans are at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of ability to see clearly, ability to understand. Humans are animals, and they're not all that more sophisticated than dogs and cats and horses and pigs and cows. They have higher brain capacity that gives them the ability to be more cunning. The intelligence of the human comes from the light being soul inside. The light beings that I met in the light, and that I was in the light. What we do is we have the ability to reduce part of our energy, put it into a human animal. It's called a soul when it's in a human animal. That's what humans call it. But it's a completely separate being than the animal. The animal's physical matter, manifestation. It's born, lives, dies. It isn't, quote, real. Any more than a character in a book is real, or a character in a movie is real, or a character in a virtual reality game is real. It's a level of awareness that we choose to experience because it's so different than our natural spiritual state.